Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mary Rose Garrido Wilcox, and I'd like to welcome you to this October 3rd meeting of the General Obligation Bond Parks and Recreation Subcommittee. This is our fourth committee. We've had pretty good membership, and if they can't come, we've had a couple of people on the phone. So first of all, I'd like to call the meeting to order, and we will introduce the interpreter, and then I'd just like to say a few things. Interpreter, where are you?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. My name is Elsie Duarte, and along with my colleague Carmen Cota, we will be servicing as interpreters in today's meeting. I will now introduce myself to our Spanish-speaking audience and review some guidelines. Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Elsie Duarte y junto con mi colega Carmen Cota estaremos sirviéndoles como intérpretes en la reunión de hoy. Al momento de hacer un comentario público, de favor les pedimos que hable despacio, con claridad y deténgase después de cada pocas oraciones para interpretarle de la manera más completa posible. Gracias. Thank you, Madam Chair.
As usual, we will have a public comment period during item 3 on today's agenda, which will be up to 30 minutes in length. We will get on with that, and if you're attending in person and would like to speak, don't forget to sign up. And if you're over the phone, I think you have to call in for virtual, and I think we already have about 6 speakers. So, okay, we've got approval of minutes, our first agenda item. Do I get a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting?
Motion to approve minutes from last meeting.
Okay, second?
I second.
Okay, we've got a motion for approval and a second. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you very much. On our next agenda item, after we get into this, we're going to have discussion prioritization evaluation. Very, very important. And since today is our last meeting, our critical task is to determine our recommendations to the executive committee. The subcommittee will need to determine which projects to move forward to the executive, the recommended funding levels, and the relative priorities. Following our last meeting, staff circulated a survey to committee members, and I think we got 7 out of 8 of us filling them out, which was pretty good. And I know myself, I was a little bit afraid of it, so I had a call, and Chris told me how to do it, and it was pretty easy when I got down to it. So thank you all for doing that. We'll be seeing the results of that survey today as a starting point to our deliberations. It's important for committee members and the public to understand that those surveys do not represent the committee's final recommendations. It's our guide, and it gives us a picture of where everybody wants to go, but we will have deliberation and make that final decision. We will continue to receive more input from the public, so the public will speak before our final deliberation in case there's something we want to add in. Next agenda item, to review the results of the survey and discuss subcommittee recommendations. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Cynthia and Inger. And I just want to, in this last meeting, say thank you very much, Parks Department. You've done great. You know, every time we asked you for something, you gave it to us. And whether it was reluctant on your part because you might want something else funded, you never showed us that. You've been totally unbiased. So thank you very much. And we'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, just to review, I wanted to remind you just the agenda that you talked about. We're going to go over the charge of the subcommittee, review identified projects, summarize the ranking results and how that was done. We're also then going to have public comment, and then discussion and questions come after that, and then we talk about the next steps. Again, just to remind the whole committee of the charge was to determine the highest priority projects and the programs, also to recommend funding levels for those items, and to refer only those needs that could not reasonably be deferred at this time. So again, I know you've seen this before. I just want to review it for the committee and people in the audience and people watching at home. There was $647 million of prioritized capitalized needs that were put forward. We know that the bond going forward for the voters is going to be $500 million, And so there's obviously a gap there, and so that's part of what the charge of this group is to try to narrow that down and prioritize things so that the executive committee can make some decisions based on this subcommittee's feedback. Just as an illustration, if we were to get to that 500 million target with all the other groups, you can see that we'd have to whittle down in each of those groups a little bit. So the maroon gets you the area where everybody then would have some similar across the board money that gets you to 500 million, and then the blue above that shows the area that might need to be whittled down in order for them to meet that $500 million objective. So with that, I'm going to have Chris Fazio review the results and talk about the ranking process, and then just remind you which projects were on the list. So Chris?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, committee members. During our last meeting, the subcommittee directed staff to prepare and distribute a survey for subcommittee members.
Sorry, Chris, I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I know we got a copy of it in our email, but I did not print it out. Do you have a spare copy of the printout? Because I did not bring a printout with me.
The agenda packet that's in front of you should have that printout.
It's on page 12 and 11.
Oh, there it is. Apologies.
The survey included a total of $110 million of projects. That included the full list of prioritized needs, with some scope adjustments, bringing the total value of the prioritized needs as identified by staff down to $102 million. None of the identified future capital needs were included in the survey. 3 new items were included, totaling $8.1 million. That was the Esteban Park Recreation Center, Grant Park Historic Bathhouse renovation, and citywide minor capital project funding. As discussed during the last meeting, the results of this survey are not binding. They're only a starting point for discussion. We asked committee members 4 questions to rank order the projects, identify projects that committee members believed required more funding than had been identified by staff, less funding, as well as projects that committee members believed should not be recommended in the bond program. 7 committee members completed the survey. To adjust for outliers, we'll be showing the results in median order. We'll use average as a tiebreaker if there were multiple projects with the same median rank. Counts will be shared for the remaining questions on high and low ranks and projects that should not be funded. So here are the results. To orient you to this table, the far left column shows the overall rank based on the survey, followed by the project name, the median rank, the high rank, so the highest rank any committee member assigned, the lowest rank any committee member assigned, and then the average rank, which again, average was used as a tiebreaker in cases with projects with the same median rank. We can come back to that table if needed, but I'll now show the same rank order with the financial information. So you're again looking at the overall survey rank followed by the project name, the bond funded amount, counts of members indicating that a project ought to have more funding than was identified, less funding or no funding, and then a running total. Again, the prioritized needs identified in the capital needs study were $109 million. As Ingrid discussed earlier, if a pro rata cut were taken, that amount would be $84 million, which would roughly cover through the 11th ranked item on the list that you're looking at, if that were the ultimate amount determined by the executive committee. Again, the amounts by subcommittee will be at the executive committee's discretion. With that, we can take any of your questions regarding the administration of the survey, but we'd recommend that you take public comment before proceeding to actual deliberations and decision making.
Okay. Why don't we go ahead and do that, and then when we start a discussion, if there's any questions on the survey, we'll address them at that time. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and start public comment.
And Madam Chair, would you
Yes.
like Patricia Wolin to read the statement to people making comments?
Yes, sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you. Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, members of the public may speak to comment on the general obligation bond program. The City Code requires speakers to present their comments in a respectful and courteous manner. Profane language, threats, or personal attacks on members of the public, subcommittee members, or staff are not allowed. A person who violates these rules will lose the opportunity to continue to speak. The subcommittee and staff cannot discuss or comment on matters related to pending claims or litigation. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead. We have 4 virtual and 4 in person today.
Our first virtual speaker is Dan Penton, followed by Laura Packard. Dan, are you on the line? Dan is not on the line. Our next speaker is Laura Packard, followed by David Howell. Laura, are you on the line? Laura is not on the line. Our next speaker is David Howell, followed by Lisa Perez. David, are you on the line?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. You may proceed.
Yeah, well, and I will start out by saying I'm a little confused because I'm here as a member of the board of the Arizona Science Center, and I don't see it on the list of those projects surveyed. Am I missing something?
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, Mr. Howell, as I recall the last meeting, that was not one that was forwarded by the subcommittee to be included on the list. And I'll turn over to Mary Rose if there's something that I did not recall from that meeting.
No, I was going to say that. I know we don't have a lot of discussion, but we had a discussion last 2 weeks ago and decided that the Science Center, because of your contract, and it was an expansion instead of just maintenance, we would not include it in this bond. That doesn't mean it won't be. You can look at the second bond issuance, the second priorities that we're going to be doing, and if there was maintenance, we might have gone ahead and done some. But because it's all for expansion, the way we interpreted it, the group as a whole voted not to include it. You can bring it up at the executive committee again.
Mary Rose, it's good to hear your voice. But at this point, that means it is not being included in this general obligation bond offering.
No, it won't.
All right. Well, that means my remarks are not really germane to what you're discussing. So I will turn the podium back over.
Okay, we will have public discussion during executive meetings, which is the next step, and those will start on the 17th. So you might look at the schedule of that if you want to keep pursuing it. Thank you.
Very good.
Our next speaker is Lisa Perez, followed by Jeff Sykes in upper council chambers. Lisa, are you on the line?
I am.
You may proceed.
Thank you. Chair Wilcox and members of the subcommittee, I'm sorry that I couldn't join you in person this afternoon, but thank you for the opportunity to address you. And I will be speaking at the proposed Estrella Civic Space. I was glad to see that it made it in the top 10 in your ranking order, and I thank you for that, for those of you that voted for this. And as I mentioned in my remarks at the last meeting, when I moved to this area in 2013, one of the first issues I heard about was the vacant land between 91st and 99th Avenue that was promised to be a regional park about 20 years ago. And so far it has sat there empty with no way of funding it, and it's just an underutilized empty lot. For those of you that are not familiar with our area, it's fair to say that we are in many ways an underserved community, but are not looked upon it that way. We do not have any city buildings or direct city services, such as a library or community center. And we have very little commercial or retail services. And we have very limited transit services to go to any of those types of services. Combine that with a very large and growing everyday residential community, and this area needs more amenities. A regional park with its open space, potential for events and community gatherings, while not Super Bowl worthy, is something that is worthy of this area. It's a quality of life game changer for all the residents that live in this community. And funding for this park is fundamentally an equity issue. I thank you for the time and the opportunity. I appreciate the rankings that you have done so far, and I urge you for your serious consideration for the Estrella Civic Space. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa.
Our next speaker is Jeff Sykes, followed by Sarah Day.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and City Council members. My name is Jeff Sykes, and I'm the Marketing Communications Director for United States Tennis Association here in the Southwest. I would like to speak to you briefly today about my concerns regarding tennis courts in the city of Phoenix and as it relates to the GO project. In the last decade plus in the city, we have seen an alarming number of city projects related to tennis courts or tennis lands being converted to pickleball courts, one of which is on this GO project at Mountain View, in addition to a myriad of past projects that have seen our community's loss of facilities. The city's current tactics and what seems like an almost default mode to pickleball courts at either the city or interested pickleball organizations' request is adversely affecting opportunities for tennis players to play the sport in our city. We feel we, meaning like the tennis community, feel is unsustainable for the future of tennis to continue in this vein, and are asking the city to take a deeper look at the impact these decisions are having on the tennis community. We propose that any new pickleball developments in the city not be built on existing city tennis infrastructure. We also propose that the city renovate and upgrade existing tennis facilities to a better standard where applicable. I would also like to ask, just personally, does the city of Phoenix have even one tennis court planned in the coming years on any of these GO bond projects? We propose that the city have a more open communication process about existing conversion projects. We're just disheartened by the staggering loss of courts that are occurring in our town, and would like to advocate and offer any consulting the city may need and how we best can create more opportunities for tennis in this city. That's it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And your comments will be put on the record and will be read by everybody. Okay.
Our next speaker is Sarah Day, followed by Jason Kuchitewa.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and council members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. And are you all council members too? Because thank you all for being here, and I know Cynthia. Thank you for being here. My name is Sarah Day, and I play with 3 different groups at Roadrunner Park. Roadrunner Park is at the intersection of 51, Highway 51 and Cactus. It's a very busy road. There are 4 courts right on Cactus, and there are 2 behind that are the best courts. What's been happening is that the tennis players suddenly realized in, I believe, May, that there was a consideration of changing some of the courts to pickleball. The problem with that is that we didn't get notice for quite a while. I didn't get it till 5 days before the end of the period for taking comments. The survey also had flaws because, and Cynthia, you know, it is what it is. There were only 32 or 30 visits to the courts, but the lights were off 10 nights. I was on the court one of the days that no one was supposed to be there, and there were a lot of issues. And I know this is a small fry kind of a thing, but all of us are seeing a lot of pickleball being taken away. I mean, taking the courts away from us. And I really understand pickleball and people, and we want to work together, but there's no working together going on here, it seems to me. We need those Roadrunner courts, 6 of them. They are full most of the time. Children, ages 6 and up, and the person who was supposed to speak is the tennis teacher for the middle school and upper school for this school nearby. I don't remember the name of it, but it's a big school. They have their own courts, but they always overflow and the kids go there. These are underprivileged children, and they're middle school and upper, and they play on these courts. There's no more time for, you're taking away 2 of those courts. Please don't.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
We did not have Roadrunner Court in our Roadrunner Park, and I think this issue is one that the city is trying to get its arms around. So we did not consider that, but I'm sure the city, in its wisdom, and the Parks Committee will look at it.
Our next speaker is Jason Kuchitewa, followed by Vania Guevara.
Thank you. Madam Chair, Vice Chair, members of the subcommittee. Although I do recognize that the Arizona Science Center is not part of the prioritized list, I would still like to voice my support. My name is Jason Kutroy-Tiwa. I'm a proud Native American father and business leader and an Arizona Science Center board member. I come before you in support of the Science Center's request for inclusion in the city's GO bond proposal. Ensuring that every child in Phoenix and Arizona from all backgrounds has the chance to pursue and secure their potential has been a key goal of mine throughout my career and in my personal life. I think we are all well aware, unfortunately, not all children are afforded the same learning opportunities in every community. That's where organizations like Arizona Science Center play a critical role. Since its opening, the Science Center has been leading education partners to immerse children of all communities, including our state's indigenous communities, with the wonders of science to expand the imagination of young people and to open their eyes to career opportunities they may never have heard of. Under 3% of the population of Phoenix residents are of Native American identity. The proposed investment will allow the Science Center to support more educators, more students, and more families. I humbly request your support of the Arizona Science Center's proposal be included in the prioritized project list or for reconsideration to be included for the Parks and Recreation's 2023 GO bond proposal. Thank you for your consideration of the Arizona Science Center's request.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Vania Guevara.
Yektutak committee members, Vania Guevara. I'm a Nahuatl descendant of Cuscatan, which is modern-day El Salvador, and I share that to acknowledge my indigenous ancestry. I'm here to talk about two important things, which is park equity access and environmental racism, and urge my support for the Estrella Civic Center recreation area. It is important to invest in parks overall, especially in historically neglected and marginalized communities. Parks and green spaces, as you all know, being on this committee, can help with mental health issues and an improved quality of life. There's a report that came out recently by the Prevention Institute that I think is relevant and important to share that shows that there is a link, or it shows that where there's a limited or lack of park access and limited tree shade canopy, that is also connected to a reduction of life expectancy. And that's often the case in Phoenix, where environmental racism is real. We have issues in South and West Phoenix where there's just a lack of investment. And so I admire all of you for taking the time to be on a committee like this. And I encourage you to not stop here, to continue beyond the GO bond hearings and see how you can work with us. I represent Chispa, Arizona, to make sure that we have a good quality of life for our people, for our Black, Indigenous, and Brown communities, because we all have a right to have a good quality of life in our city. Badiush, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, that ends it? Okay. We now close public comment, yes? Yes, go ahead.
I do have a question about Mountain View. And I know there's 6 tennis courts and the plan to build pickleball courts. Could you explain the relationship between pickleball and tennis for the future in the bond and of Mountain View Park?
Sure, Madam Chair, Subcommittee Member Casa, and members of the subcommittee. In terms of the project at Mountain View, that project is for 16 new pickleball courts. So in that situation, that's not a conversion. It is an addition of new pickleball courts and renovation to the existing courts that exist there now.
The six tennis courts?
Mm-hmm. That is correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Okay, now we will have discussion. And Chris, go ahead.
And Madam Chair, just as a procedural note, so we'll be bringing up on your screen momentarily a document that will be the same rank order that we just displayed during the presentation, but will be a fluid document so that committee members, as you deliberate and make motions and decisions, can see live where the committee stands with respect to its recommendations.
Okay. All right. We'll wait till that comes up and then. Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is our final decision before we move on to executive. And we have before us a survey. 7 of the 8 of us participated, and these are the order that it has come out in. One of the goals of the committee, and we'll discuss this too, is that we were given $109 million to work with, 109.7. And what we have tried to do as a committee is to keep within that framework, knowing that at exec we might have some cuts, but to keep within that framework. Many of the other committees have added monies, or I don't think anybody subtracted. I think they all added. But if one of the things that we'll consider today is, do we keep it within this framework? I would love to go into the executive and say we did our job and we followed the guidelines and tried to keep it within a reasonable amount of money that you gave to us. So with that, let me open it up for discussion, and the floor is open to remark on the survey, to ask that something be moved, something be removed, if that's your pleasure, or any other comments. I believe, yes, go ahead.
Madam Chair, I expressed my views several meetings ago on presenting a balanced program to the people of Phoenix, and they will be the ultimate deciders on whether the funding will be approved or not. We decide, we're part of that process of which projects will be presented to them. And I just think it's incumbent on us, looking at Phoenix, entire Phoenix, south and north and east and west, that the total population is balanced with parks. And looking at, first of all, what was presented, the 13, it was not balanced, and I spoke to that. In looking at the survey, it is less balanced, I think, particularly if we look at the slide that indicates that our charge is $84 million. That we talk a lot about $109 million, but that it's really $84 million at this time. Anything else is really hypothetical. And maybe they'll take away from police and fire and give it to parks, and maybe they won't. Maybe they'll take away from parks and give it to police and fire. I don't know. That's up to the executive committee and the council. But several things pop to me, and I would like to see moved. One is there's a gap in North Phoenix. There's a gap. And between Glendale and Bell, there's nothing. There's no project. And I understand the need of South Phoenix. I do. I was born in South Phoenix. I've lived in Phoenix most of my life, raised in Tucson, but lived in Phoenix most of my life. And the woman who spoke for Australia Park, absolutely. And so I was disappointed to see a regional park in the southeast, but not the northeast, in that $84 million is 1 through 11. And so I'm going to ask others on the committee to make their comments, but maybe it turns into a motion, I don't know. But one, I would like the city to talk about the gap in between Glendale and Bell. But also, I'm going to recommend that we move, and maybe that'll be a motion later, Desert View Regional Park, it's called Civic Space, to number 8, next to Australia. There's kids, there's families, there's seniors. There are people all over the city that use parks and deserve parks. And that's my comment.
Okay. We know that we're going to have one request then. And the other thing, because we have listened to what you've said, and there have been other people also talking about the evenness of it. it's really hard because downtown gets a lot, and downtown is almost, in my opinion, kind of circled, and then you have south, and you have west, and you have north. So the downtown projects, including Mayor Hans and some of the others that were coming forward, were, in my mind, more, central and citywide because everybody uses them. But I know that doesn't fulfill it. One of the things that staff had talked about, and perhaps we can do a compromise here, is there's a park called Sweetwater Park. And Sweetwater has some things that we could do. It's not prioritized for this bond, but maybe we could move it into it. It would mean doing $2 million to do some of those improvements. And if we did do that, we could perhaps take it from the Pueblo Grande Museum. That ranked a little bit lower, and we could move $2 million and perhaps put Sweetwater a little bit higher. That could be one of the solutions. Cynthia, you want to explain what would be done there?
Sure, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, and subcommittee member Casa, and looking at the map, same map that I think we distributed in the second meeting, I certainly am looking at what projects we currently have. You specifically mentioned between Glendale and Bell. We do not have any projects currently. The projects we have, there are 3 of them just north of Bell Road, which are the improvements to Telephone Pioneers of America, also the 16 new courts and renovations over at Mountain View that we discussed a few minutes ago, and then the new Desert View Civic Space Park, which you were just speaking of. So Sweetwater Park is a park that is in need of improvements that would actually fall right in that gap. It is near 44th Street north of Cactus Road. And so at that park, we have been looking to identify funds. There's no playground at Sweetwater Park. It does have some open turf that's used for sports purposes and some athletic courts, but believe it or not, no playground. We're also in need of some lighting improvements. It also sits just north of Paradise Valley Mall, which I think many of you know is currently under redevelopment, and sits near residential area with also a lot of apartments around the park. And actually, as we look at Sweetwater and the needs, we think we could fulfill those needs with $1.5 million and get that park a new playground, some additional furniture items, picnic benches, things like that, and if necessary, the lighting improvements as well. So that is certainly something, if the subcommittee would, at the direction of the subcommittee, excuse me, that we could add to your list of priorities. In terms of where we pull it from, Madam Chair, you recommended the Pueblo Grande Museum currently has $6.8 million allocated to that, and that is just something we could scale down the scope by $1.5 million. If that's your direction, that certainly could be an option. Again, that would be at the direction of the subcommittee.
Gary?
I keep concentrating on the 84. And in this chart that you put up is terrific in that it's got a running total. And so you're taking from Pueblo Grande, which likely won't be funded.
I think, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, it's just in terms of balancing it, where you end up ranking. If you add Sweetwater Park, that would be up to the subcommittee to decide where you want to rank it. That's just to balance and stay at the 109.7 that you're currently at.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay.
Sorry, Madam Chair.
Yes,
So
sure.
I just want to confirm, we could add it to this and then bump it up to like the top 10 priorities, and we'd still be at the 109 because you'd subtract, right? Okay, I just want to make sure.
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, that's correct. And ultimately, where all of these rank will be where the subcommittee lands on ranking all of these.
And just one quick follow-up on the Pueblo Grande, which I think this is a good solution for us to consider, the Sweetwater opportunity. With Pueblo Grande, are there other funding sources that are available to something like Pueblo Grande that are not available to a Sweetwater or another park project?
That's a great question, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. We do have other funding sources in the Parks Department that we could look at exploring, either for Sweetwater or for Pueblo Grande Museum. I would say based on the improvements that were included in the 6.8 million Pueblo Grande submittal, that, those included things like upgrades to the gallery, collection storage upgrades, a master plan for the park, and also development of an area that's not easily accessible now, the Park of Four Waters. So in terms of if the direction of the subcommittee is to reduce that scope, it just means that we would reduce the scope of that overall project, and we would look for other funding sources to try to get those done.
Thank you.
I want to mention before we go further, Jeff Spellman couldn't make the meeting today. He's traveling and didn't feel that he could even do Zoom, but he did relay that he had reviewed the survey because he was going to be out of town, and he agreed with the survey. He thought that we had done a good job with it, so I want to put that on the record. So do we have any other discussion on this survey besides? Yes, go ahead.
Yes, Madam Chair. So I would like to see what it looks like, right, with the Sweetwater on there, one. And then in regards to item 11, which is the Telephone Pioneers of America Rec Center, can you clarify, this facility is the second facility like 360 in the city, right? So technically, we have a southern area for ADA accessible folks that need this kind of activity, and then a northern part, but there's nothing in between. So if I have ADA needs and I live in the center of the city, I only have two options. My take on this is that we should move Telephone Pioneers of America Park up to the top 10 as a service to our ADA community in Phoenix. There's only one location for them to get that resource right now. So, when the time comes, like if we're making motions or having that conversation, I just want to be clear that I think that that's a need as well. And then the second part is to my colleague Gary. He mentioned, moving up Desert View. Now, I think that is also a need. If we were to replace the Spice Center, which is the South Phoenix Youth Center, those improvements with the Desert View, is there another pot of money where Spice could get the funding from?
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, that would again be something we would look to our Phoenix Parks and Preserve Initiative Fund. So it's not currently included in our 5-year CIP plan, but again, any projects that we feel would be critical and need improvements, that's always a source of funds that we look to using.
Okay, and then the reason I bring this up is I was counting, right? Like I was going through, and out of the, and I might have counted wrong because again, I'm not a math teacher. Out of the top 10 projects, with the exception of the South Mountain Roadway and the Mountain View Sports Complex in the Maryville Regional Park, out of the top 10, 5 of them are in District 7 and 8. Out of the top 10, and we have 8 districts in the city. So I just, in the spirit of the fair share for the city, I think that is something that we need to look at someone who doesn't live in 7 or 8, asking themselves, I am a Phoenix resident and a Phoenix taxpayer, and where's the investment in my community as well? So that's something that I echo with Mr. Casa.
I would just like to point out, though, of the ones that might not get funded because the 82, we do have 4 of them that are in the South and Central Phoenix. So, yes. That kind of balances it, I think, a little bit, because those will not possibly get funded.
Can you just, because here's what I have, right? The citywide one, or the citywide funding, that's all the city. Yeah. Item 2, Esteban is District 8. South Mountain Roadway Safety, it serves the whole city. We all go there, but it lives in 6 and 8. Margaret T. Hans lives in 7. Harmon, Grant Park both live in 8. Estrella lives in 7. South Phoenix Youth Center lives in 8. Mountain View Sports Complex, 3 and 2. Maryville, 5. And that's the top 10. That's my concern, that it does not look like the pie has been spread equally, or that we've done a good job at spreading it equally.
The one comment on that is that the Margaret T. Hans Park, it really is a regional park. It's not for south or just west, It's a regional, so I don't think you should include it in when you're doing your analysis.
The reason I say that is because if I live in Desert Ridge, Margaret T. Hans Park is not the park that I'm going to take my children to. It's a drive, right? I'm going to take to the park that's closer to me. That's what I'm saying. Like, as a Phoenician who doesn't live in an area that's accessible, like, we have to consider that, yes, they're regional parks. I love South Mountain Park, but it's not my go-to everyday park that I want to drive by, that I want to take, my nieces and nephews to. It's got to be a park in your community, right? Kind of like how we choose our schools in our community. We want to see the funding in the community.
Well, just a little bit on that is that Margaret T. Hans Park has our major festival activities. It has ML King Day, it has concerts, it has the Japanese Center, the Irish Center. There's a lot to offer the whole community. It's not similar to South Mountain Park or even Sweetwater Park or Desert Sky Park or Desert West Park, because it doesn't have the recreational. It really is a fiesta type facility that's complemented by our major city library. So just, in that thinking, I just can't see it just being, put in to a South Phoenix number.
Madam Chair, with all due respect, even if we didn't count Margaret Hans Park, that's 6 out of the top 10 are still primarily located in District 7 and 8.
Okay.
Say something, please?
Dana? Mm-hmm. And then Gary.
I'm sitting back, I'm listening, and being from South Phoenix, equity has been scarce in our district for a very long time, and I've been here almost 50 years. And to see this finally happening, talking about balance, Mr. Casa, this is a balance for me. This is a balance for the people that I represent in South Phoenix. This has, even sitting here amongst you all, or everybody here today, it's a huge voice for District 8 from where I live in, from South Phoenix, period. And so you, Madam Chair, you spoke about Mr. Jeff saying he is okay with it as is. I am too, to be honest with you. I understand the balance to put other things in place, but let's put South Phoenix in place for once. We've been the low people at the totem pole for a very long time. And it's, Mr. Sam Cooke, I'm a music person, said a change is going to come, and I believe that this is the now and the time for that change to happen. So that's just me speaking from where I come from and from my heart and my passion from the community from where I'm coming from. So if I am able to say, if this is not the time, let me know. But I'm moving for it as is.
Okay. I think, Gary, go ahead.
And I understand, I do. And money flows into parks from various pockets, right? From the general fund, from 3PI, and from the bond, and from grants. And I don't believe that, no, I'll reverse what I was going to just say. I believe that the bonds should reflect the total community, the needs of the total community, because the total community is going to be voting on the bond.
Okay. Well, we've heard the discussion. You had a motion that you thought you
I
wanted
do have
to
a motion.
have us consider.
I do. Maybe I have two motions. The one motion would be to place Sweetwater Park in the top 10 of, let's say, number 10 on the ranking as a new project to be considered.
Madam Chair,
I make the motion.
Casa, can we clarify, is that at $1.5 million?
At $1.5 million. And I make that motion.
Is there a second to that motion?
I second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. What would that do to Maryville Regional Pool? It would go down, and it would barely get funded. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, I think it's premature to assume that we know what the executive committee is going to do, but it does put it lower on the rankings of what the subcommittee. So I wouldn't get stuck on those specific things. I think you can also, in your memo to the executive committee, put some of these discussions that we've been having into that as a narrative so that they understand the concerns that have been brought today, and even in the three previous meetings. I think those can be outlined. But again, I don't want you to assume that you know what the executive committee is going to be, but the lower it is on the list, then it shows lower priority from this subcommittee.
I have a hard time putting it above Maryville because of the fact that Maryville has tremendous growth, and even though it does have facilities, this regional pool facility and the 3 splash pads for some of the smaller pools is very needed. Probably in Maryville they have the highest rank of our youth. We have very large families. We have very few families who have the luxury of having pools in their yards, and I would hate to do that. I could support it on 11 and 12 and put telephone a little bit lower, but I just cannot support it going above Maryville. Any other discussion?
So I think we have a motion and a second.
And a second, yeah. I think, and just for the sake of the conversation, I don't think we've decided that this is the full list yet, right? I think putting it on the list to see what it looks like and then moving it around live, I think would be helpful for me as a committee member. I'm not going to speak for anyone else, but I would like to see it on and what it looks like, and then maybe we can move some other items, right, with hearing everyone at the table.
The dilemma was the motion was to put it in that order. So the motion would have to be changed.
Running,
Yeah.
but this
isn't final. Like, it's just a motion to see it on here.
Okay, because I thought you wanted to put it in place of Maryville on 10.
I didn't say that.
So
Okay.
I guess
I'd
just
like to place it in
So
this.
let's let our law department weigh in on this as far as, we've got a motion on the table and we have a second, so what do we need to do with that, Patty?
At this point, you should vote on it, or the mover or the maker of the motion, and the second can withdraw them.
Vote. Mr. Bassett?
I did not understand that.
Okay, I think
Either vote
we
or we
can
withdraw.
vote, but the understanding I got from it is that you wanted to put it in the top 10, but I naturally assumed that it would replace Maryville, which I have a real problem with. If you can adjust your motion to say include it in the priorities, and then we can discuss where to put it.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, if I may, if you're not ready to make a motion, then maybe what was suggested by Patty Boland would be maybe the time for a motion isn't yet, and so if the maker and the second would like to withdraw that, then we could have the discussion, put it on the list, and we can still have that discussion later. I mean, we can still put it on the list, just without the word motion, because that makes it an official thing.
Well, that's fine, but I don't know how we ever make a decision when we get to make the final decision. And I thought my intent was to put it in the running total to move it up. If this isn't the time to do that, I'm going to make another motion.
Well, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, I think you can do that without making a motion. And so if you'd like us to do that, we can do it on the list without making a motion at this time. But if that's not the pleasure of the motion maker and the second, then I'm just giving information.
I withdraw that motion, and you heard.
Do I have to withdraw the second? Oh, I withdraw it.
Okay, so now we can just put it on the list, and that gets us back to where we need to be.
Okay, thank you.
So when is the appropriate time to talk about Desert View Civic Space?
I think that's part of this discussion here, and we can,
Okay.
at the pleasure of the chair, if the time is now, then the time is now.
Well, again, if I don't make a motion, I don't know how the decisions are made.
Yeah, I think what we're doing...
Unless we say, no, we just accept
No, I think what we're trying to do is get the list so you can all look at the list and see if that's where you want to be before a motion is made.
I'll just repeat, then I won't make a motion, but I'll repeat that because we have funded Australia, which I voted for high, I forget exactly where it was, but I voted for that in the top 10, Australia Civic Space. I would like to see Desert View Civic Space to balance the project citywide. I would like to see that moved up, and I want to see that moved up in the area of the 84 million. Thank you.
Okay. So let's give him a minute to just try to get those in there. Are you?
And just from my understanding, I think we can be in this space of prototyping the ranking without having to make motions and seconds, and we can then, when we have a list that we want to bring a motion forward with, we can then cross that bridge. We don't need to go through each individual move, do we?
If I may, I believe that you can do that. The problem with making motions is then you have to move to reconsider them. But you can play with the list, and then as you feel you're gaining consensus, then you can start making motions.
And Madam Chair, I agree with that. If there's consensus that we want to put Sweetwater on the list, for example, that we all have consensus, yes, that's on the list, and then we can build the consensus, and then at the end, if everything's where it needs to be, the motion can be made to move forward.
Approve the list. Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, so Sweetwater gets added, and
we wanted to see Desert View moved up under Estrella Civic Space. Can we see what that looks like?
So, Madam Chair, if that would be the pleasure of the consensus of the group.
I don't know if there's a consensus up here for that. Is there, maybe we could, any other comments? Is there a consensus on that?
I'd support moving it up to that position.
Okay. Andre? Yeah. All right, go ahead and move it up.
So we'll put that under Estrella just to see where it looks for now. It's hard to do these spreadsheets in public.
Oh, I know. It's hard to do them alone.
Okay, so this is what the list looks like with your current direction.
I think what I would like to see, if there's consensus, is the two regional pool and splash pad, Harmon and Maryville, be put side by side. Because I just feel that they're the same project, just in different parts of the city, but they address the same issue. Do you have a problem with that? Okay.
So we'll put Maryville directly underneath Harmon?
Yes.
Okay.
And then can I add one more thing to change while you're changing that? Could we see the Telephone Pioneers in the place of the Grant Park bathhouse renovation? Like swap those two as we're doing the pools so that
Madam Chair, committee members, it'd be helpful if we do one at a time.
Oh, one at a time.
Just
I was trying to save you time.
Make sure we're all on the same page with what, what the list is.
Thank you to whoever's doing the spreadsheet.
I would prefer not to do that because
that would be Adam Miller is doing this.
I think I just want to see what it looks like.
Okay, but I really would prefer that we kind of look at that because that is in conjunction with Harmon Park. They kind of go together. So it'd be, all the swimming pool ones are together then.
Actually, while we're doing it, if it's separate people Cynthia, could you walk us through one more time the Grant Park, the bathhouse? Just again, remind us of that project.
Sure, absolutely, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. Excuse me. The renovation, it's an existing bathhouse, but since as part of the pool concept, that pool at Grant Park would become a splash pad. It'd be converted to a splash pad, so it would no longer be needed as a bathhouse. So this project was introduced early on by the subcommittee members to renovate this space into a flexible recreation space. So it would be able to be used for drop-in recreation programs. One of the notions was a computer lab, just a flexible recreation space that would be located on Grant Park, but it would be the renovation of the existing historic bathhouse.
And one of the reasons is also because it's historic and we can't tear it down. So it would go, as you do the covering of the pool and the splash pads, you could have them really blend well together, you know, but we can't tear it down. So,
are there historic preservation funds or any other options? I mean, I know there's potential other funds, but because of the historic designation, are there other funds that could be available to do that work?
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, we can certainly look to HP grants to help offset that cost for the renovation. That's something we could look at. And like other projects, 3PI funds, so like anything else,
sure,
we could seek other funding sources.
So I think we're caught up on the various ideas to look at it. The only thing I would point out that Sweetwater needs to just be put up into some location if it's not where it needs to be.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yes,
Wait, did we decide not to move Telephone Pioneers? To
So
swap
we're gonna,
it with Grant
where
Park
did you want to put that?
Bathhouse?
With Grant?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the one. We're going to move it with Grant.
I just...
Then we'll be caught up.
I don't know if we have a consensus on that, because this is probably the only time, and the community is really upset because they're going to lose their pool, so we're trying to make sure that they get more than we can, offer in view of a pool. Losing a pool is hard for a community, and it's an old area that you could really have a beautiful setting with all three. So,
And, again, Madam Chair, my understanding is that this is not the final list, right? We could still move it up.
well, we're trying to get a
okay,
consensus.
I would like to see what it looks like.
Okay. We're trying to get a consensus, and I don't know.
You could do a show of hands for consensus if that makes it easier for.
If there's a consensus to move the, what is it, the
Telephone Pioneers.
Telephone Pioneer up to where the boathouse is, all those in favor of doing that, please raise your hand. Those opposed? Okay, we have a tie. We have a tie, so it ends.
Well, that doesn't help, does it?
I know, it ends.
That's the definition of not consensus.
I would just, in support, this is why this is hard, right? This is why public policy is not easy. In support of Telephone Pioneers of America, a park which I unfortunately didn't have a ton of background on before, as a veteran who works with the veteran community, I would advocate for the inclusion of things that are accessible to, that are ADA accessible. And I think Telephone Pioneers has the additional, that element, of course, for, communities, ADA communities. Again, it's specifically veterans in the case of the folks that I work with. But then also the element of the geographic, dispersion of the options for folks to vote on. That doesn't mean I'm against the Grant Park bathhouse at all, but I just think those are two things that give it a relative advantage, in my opinion.
Okay.
If we swapped, just to look at the list again, telephone with the Spice Center, right? Because we know that there are other pockets of money that we could look for the Spice Center. Just swap those two.
Which one is that?
It's ranked number 10 right now. South Phoenix Youth Center.
South Phoenix Youth Center, okay.
Yeah.
Is that the Alta Vista or the 7th?
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, that's on 7th Street.
7th Street. Is there a consensus on that? All those who would like to see it, I'll go ahead and agree with that. Any opposed? Okay, so we'll go ahead and do that then.
Okay, so we'll make that movement. Telephone Pioneer in replacement of South.
But the Alta Vista Center is the other one. That's still the 4.6.
Madam Chair, that is correct. The South Mountain Community Center, which has not yet been touched, is the one on off of Central and Alta Vista.
Okay, Alta Vista, okay. Okay, so now we have before us a list and kind of a revised list.
I'd like to make
Please.
a comment.
Yes, go ahead.
If we can go back to the list. So again, in the interest of balance, we have Mountain View, which is, in an area that could use support. And I don't know how many pickleball courts we're talking about, but it's a relatively small amount, but it is now off the grid, so to speak, of the 84. And so is Telephone Pioneers is beyond the 84. And I just don't know that the executive committee, when it's looking at the $500 million, is going to be taking from one, I can't imagine, but maybe they will, from one bond to another. And so, just to point out, for balance, Mountain View Sports Complex is very deserving and for a balanced program to the people of Phoenix, I would think that it should be moved up and up above the 84.
The telephone part?
Both the Telephone Pioneers and the Mountain View Sports Complex. Both are kind of northish, and they're outside the 84.5.
Well, I think
understanding this is not easy.
it's not easy because of we started out with the 109, which we thought maybe we could get, but then we were asked to go down to about 82 because in reality that's what would probably be recommended. And we've kept really good, within our parameters, but we will not be, given any more money. Let me see.
And Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, I think, there's a lot of valid points that have been made today that we can also emphasize in our memo as well, in our presentation to the executive committee. So we want to make sure we're keeping track of all that as well, so that we add that in. But again, there's been no specific dollar amount, and there's been lots of good discussions in all the other subcommittees as well. So some, as you mentioned, have come slightly over, and to your point, no one subtracted away.
Madam Chair, and
yes,
everyone, could we flip the South Phoenix Youth Center and the Mountain View Sports Complex in order, so then Spice would be number 12 and Mountain View would be 11? I know that's still over the 84 and it's at 89, less, right? But at least it gets it a little bit closer to potential funding.
Well, the dilemma is the Maryville Regional Pool is really important to the west side.
But I'm not moving the region. I want to move Mountain View and South Phoenix Youth Center, switch those. Anything?
Okay.
I think all the projects are important to all the communities.
Okay, so it would still be below, or below the cutoff, but it would just highlight the importance of it. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
I could support that. Are there any disagreements with that?
Could you repeat?
What we would do is Mountain View and South Phoenix Youth Center would switch. We do have the South Phoenix Center, Community Center. It's also below.
I would
Want to put number,
I want to move number 11 to number 12 and number 12 to number 11. So South Phoenix Youth Center and Mountain View Sports Complex, flip them. If we can come to a consensus on that.
I would agree with
South
that.
Mountain Community Center would be above Mountain View Sports Complex.
No, it's the South Phoenix Youth Center and the Mountain View Sports Complex. Switch those two. Switch 10 and 11 and 12 right here, these two. Not the South Mountain Community Center.
It'd be the 3.2.
Yep. The 3.2 and so flip it. Do we do show of hands to move it up?
Okay, hold on a minute. Is there any discussion on it? Okay, show of hands of those who would move it up. Okay, we're going to move it up then. All right, so we still have the pools are all together. The center, and by the way, I think everybody loved that citywide funding, and that was really nice seeing that. I think that's going to help the whole city. So it's one of the issues that nobody has to say north, south, or west or east. Okay, so this is what we have. We have basically citywide, Esteban, South Mountain Roadway, Margaret Hance. We could create havoc and put Margaret Hance last. I'm just kidding.
We could move it all the way down.
Oh my God, it has so many.
Not advocating for that. Make sure that's clear in the notes.
Yes, we all love.
We could include all of the projects.
But I will ask the controversial question based
Yes.
on the testimony that we've received throughout this process. Is Margaret T. Hance Park is beautiful. I work very close to there at ASU downtown, and there's a lot of people there, and it looks great. I also recreate at a lot of other parks that are less well cared for than Hance Park. And the difference, let's just say for a Sweetwater, of me being able to take my 3 kids to a park with safe equipment is a huge value add to folks in those communities in a way that another $17.8 million into a great park, you know, what's the best bang for your buck, I guess, is a question. I'll ask that question and stop there. But
Well, you know, we can take money off of projects if you want and switch them. You know, not switch them, but reduce them to add others. So that is an option that they gave us.
Madam Chair, do we still have to place Sweetwater on a rank?
Well, currently
Has a 0
it is
right now.
ranked at 17.
Okay. Could we move it to number 12?
Well, you've already moved South Phoenix Youth once.
I think it would be a great exercise, indeed, to take from Margaret. I hope I'm not on TV. I think that's just an interesting point
And then we
that
can
no
still,
one has raised except you had the nerve to do that. And
Madam Chair, the reason I said, you know, to move it 12 is because at the Spice, we're at 91, right? And if we move Sweetwater up, I think we're still close to 90, but not over, if we do the math.
so the great math question is, how much do we take
from Hance
to get some of these other
projects funded
into the 84 that are funded?
And Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, I think one of the questions that staff presented on also was the scalability of some of these projects. And so I would defer to Cynthia Aguilar to talk about the scalability of that particular item.
Sure, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. In terms of Margaret T. Hance Park, as we know, and you know, it's been going through a large revitalization project, and we actually have a very formalized master plan that's been designed by consultants. So this phase was designed in a way it would be very, very difficult to simply scale this one back. So a consideration could be moving it later in the ranking in its entirety, removing it from your list. but there's no way. We did go to our consultants to try to scale this back, and a park that size and the engineering that's involved because it's located over a series of bridges and the freeway there, this is not a project that's easily scalable. So I share that not to deter you, but just to know realistically it might be something that you might need to have discussions on moving further down the list or removing versus scaling back. This is not a type of project we can just shave off money from and have a meaningful improvement there, because again, it's located over the Interstate 10 and that's all factored in, so we just can't shave it like a typical project.
And if I could add to that, I think if that was something that was scalable, probably staff might have done that when they came back with those 3 that they did shave from, and that was not one of the projects that they did.
I'm glad you answered that, because I was thinking they would have shaved it someplace there. So,
Yeah.
okay. Okay, well, what we could do is present what we have, and what we could do is strengthen the argument in our presentation that if we were to be granted a little bit more money, we would highlight the North Sweetwater, highlight the Telegraph Pioneers, because that is north, isn't it? Okay, and we would ask that those be brought up so that we can have more equity. Could
we move it on the list?
What?
Could we move it on the list? Because if we, and my thinking is if we're going to present this to the executive committee and say Sweetwater is a priority, but it's number 17.
Well, we'll just say it came in later because we wanted to have more equity, and this is a way to get us more equity. We had already discussed and had surveys and all the others.
If
Yes.
if we look at, is it the top 9 that takes us to 84.5? Can please just help with your map? Pick Camelback, pick Glendale. And I do hate to talk about north versus south. I do, but let's do that anyway. Pick Camelback. How many are north of Camelback, and how many are south of Camelback? And understanding that Hance Park is a regional park, but I also, listen to the people who spoke in favor of that park. They talk regionally. I mean, they talk their neighborhood. Sure.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, I'm looking at my map here. So in terms of north of Camelback, we have 4 projects. If we include Sweetwater, it would be 5. So that would be the improvements to the Washington Activity Center, Telephone Pioneers of America, Mountain View, Desert View, Civic Space, and then Sweetwater would be the 5th, but as it stands.
I missed them.
But you're talking about in the 84.5, that would be
Oh,
2.
I'm so sorry.
That would be 2 projects based on what you asked.
I'm sorry, repeat that.
2 projects. It'd be the citywide, and it would be the Desert View.
Desert and Telephone, right? Those are the 2. Desert Vista and Telephone are the 2 north of Camelback.
Not if you're talking about 84.5. No. You have the citywide. If you're cut it off as 84.5, it'd be Desert View and the citywide, because Telephone Pioneer is
So just one,
comes
then.
in at 86,
So it's just-
if I'm reading this
One.
correct.
Okay.
Which is where we were when we started, right?
In fact, I think Telegraph was more included in at that time when we started. It was 11.
Is there any of the top 10 projects that we have right now that we could take, and I don't want to say take, but re-budget further?
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, at the last meeting, the projects we had presented were the ones we felt were scalable. So the rest of them, and we did that, so those numbers have been factored into the projects that you scaled. Again, I'd say something similar to Hance versus scaling back. We would look more at eliminating or pushing to the bottom of the list.
Or at least further down.
What?
Or at least further down, not necessarily at the bottom, but at least further down if that's what the pleasure
Further
of
down on the
yeah.
list, okay. I mean, I would still like to see Sweetwater move up and see what that cumulative cost is with Sweetwater at number 12, because then I would feel more confident of going to the executive committee and saying, hey, here are our top 12 projects. They are dispersed throughout the city.
Well, you've already reduced, we've already put the 2 South Phoenix youth centers.
I know, Madam Chair, but there's only one item north of Camelback right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, we had
And the rest
more.
are all
We had
on
more, and we
priority.
changed it, though. We had
one.
Telegraph.
No, we had Mountain View. We had Mountain View at 9 and telephone at 11.
Telephone, we had 2.
At 11. We had them at 9 and 11.
Yeah, and that would have been in the funding for the 82, I believe. So do we want to go back to the original? Because that would give us 2 projects on the northern side of Phoenix if we go back to the original.
But the dollar amount is stark, the difference in funding
But they
is so
still
stark.
make the cutoff.
I understand they make the cutoff if you count the projects, but if you look at the money, and you're saying 4 million versus 80 million.
Yeah.
That, not a balanced. I don't know what the ultimate balance would be, but this is the opposite of balance.
Could you entertain the idea just to see what the cumulative is up there?
What idea?
Of moving Sweetwater up to 12 to see what that cumulative is. I can't do the math. I'm not, I just want to see what it is because it's at 1.5 right now, right? What Sweetwater would cost. So if we move it up to number 12 to see what that cumulative total is, it'll be over the 84, but how much over the 84 is it?
Madam Chair, members of subcommittee, it would be 89.4.
89.4.
So under 90, I guess.
So it would still be, yeah. I think what you told us from the start is that the executive committee would probably look at cutting about 20% off of this.
And Chair, that was just illustrative. That was not necessarily what they're going to do. We don't know what they're going to do. Again, the bottom line is the lower the ranking is from the subcommittee,
yeah.
I think the lower they believe that might have been of importance to the subcommittee is all I would say. Doesn't mean that they aren't going to go beyond the 84 for the parks or quite honestly go above it. I don't know. That's why the executive committee has those hard decisions to make. But I think what they're looking to the subcommittees for is just some understanding of what you think the prioritization is and at what level that should be funded.
Okay. So if we did put Sweetwater higher, and it's still under the 84 or 86, we could, in the discussion with, because I'll be presenting with staff to the executive, I could tell them that we had a very hard time because of equity, and we would like to perhaps have them look at the 3 projects that, Gary, you've brought out, Sweetwater and then the other 2 northern ones, as the additional money that we would like to use in case they use a 20% cutoff. We could say that. That'd be okay? It is very challenging. Without reducing one of these other projects, it's really hard. And I think because of the engineering on both Harmon and Maryville, it'd be, again, hard, Cynthia, to reduce them because everything's kind of planned that size, isn't it?
Sure, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, the pools, the regional pool plan includes the conversion of the other pools into splash pads, so there's no real way to scale those back.
Yeah, it's just like a major aquatic issue.
I guess going back to Hans Park, so when you say there's really no way to scale that back, when I my recollection, and we have the notes here, but if you could remind us, they didn't sound like things that were predicated on other things like splash pads being converted that were dependent on pools being shuttered. So can you walk us through, maybe in greater detail, why there are not elements? You know, for example, could we pick the access from the Central Bridge and light rail, lighted access to the park, you know, over the excavation project, which I imagine is very heavy on engineering costs, you know, on the hill, that, you know, there's no way to slice those up or determine pick a project that we think is a higher priority versus another as part of that? What is the biggest thing on our list, 17.8 million?
Sure, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, it's a great question. Part of the work is the foundation of the park. So when we go in to do any work, ADOT has to come in and do work underneath to protect the bridge joints so water doesn't go through the tunnel. And so repairs of those joints is something that has to be done in a certain sequence, is the best way. I'm not an engineer that I can describe it. So once we're going to disturb a certain part of the park in general, they have to come in and do that work, which is part of this. But in terms of could we look at, it's more about connectivity, I would say, about these things. Chopping it up becomes more challenging. If you were to reduce the number, which is still something you could do, if you moved it further down the list, we honestly would look to find other sources of funding to help supplement that so that it could still be constructed in a way that makes sense holistically
Makes it cohesive
for that park.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, understand. Thank you.
This is an absolute challenge, I see, because as you all sit and we talk about moving this here and moving that, South Phoenix is going back down. And so as I stated earlier about the equity in our community, and I totally get what you're saying about having the balance up north versus down south and things like that. Totally understand it. So, but I was listening to you say that there's funding that you can possibly pull out of different places or find to help support some of these. Especially, I'm looking at the South Phoenix Youth Center. That's by South Mountain High School, where predominantly African American and Hispanic kids are at. And those babies have nothing. And that's been dormant for years. I used to go there, and I actually went to Camelback High School. But I used to go there because of the programs that were there. And that's something that I would want the committee to understand, the importance of what our Hispanic and our Black babies really need right now today. And that's a huge need in that community. And like I said, I totally get the balance. I really do. But again, the equity is coming down in our neighborhood once again, and that's what I was telling you earlier. We're always at the lower totem pole in South Phoenix. But I'm okay, and I'm going to listen to what y'all say, and I'm going to do my best to agree. But I had to put that out there, that you're pushing us down once again.
Well, we have before us a revision that basically highlights the aquatic program, gives us South Mountain roadway safety, gives us 1 and 2 as the committee picked them because I was pretty unanimous, gives us the Estrella space and the telephone, the Estrella space and the which is it? The Desert View civic space. Those are both higher, and that would fit the 2 big regional parks for the north and the south. And really it's the northwest because the Estrella is really far out. If we did that and we moved Sweetwater higher on the list to just make sure that we can tell them we would like to see Sweetwater funded to add 1 more northern to, the ones we have.
It's such a shame because they're relatively minor amounts compared, and they miss it. And as telephone is 2.2, and Mountain View, which is 1.2.
Well, the Desert View is 8.4, so.
No.
But, you know, we can again stress to them that we would like the cutoff to be maybe where we put the Sweetwater at least, and then consider others, so that we can have the north.
Sweetwater to 12, for example.
We could do that. I know the South Mountain area will be shortened, but we do have funding that we can reflect. And I believe that we probably could find money, particularly for the community center. What we also could do is put Sweetwater up and say that we would like from 13 from 13 to be funded. And we know that they're going to cut, but we would like them to cut from 13 up and exclude two of the bigger projects. Not bigger. The Pueblo's not that big, but we could say we could do 12, put Sweetwater up to 13. I'm sorry. We could do 10 Pioneers, 11 Mountain View, 12 South Mountain Community Center, and then the South Mountain Youth Center would be 14, and Sweetwater would be 13. And we would ask that they look at the 100 mark instead of the 82 because of the equity issue. And that way the ones that we would not be including would be Pueblo and Washington. We could include them, but we could draw the line at 100 and say that it's our, you know, you gave us 109. We believe that the 100 we could do if you would include all of these others because of equity. I don't know any other way to do it because we're only dealing with a certain amount of money.
So, Madam Chair, would you like us to repopulate something so you could all see that? And if it is, just
Yes.
so we are clear on what that is.
Yes, why don't you do that? And we would do telephone, Mountain View, we would do Sweetwater, and South, and see where we come with the money there.
Okay, so we'll put Sweetwater in between Mountain View and South Phoenix Youth Center.
Yes,
Okay. Okay, I think we have what we believe you suggested.
Okay, so we would come up to a total of 97.2. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, if you're intending to then make a recommendation to the executive committee that we include the top 14 and the total of 97.2, then that is correct.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Can I just say that this is exactly what I was trying to get across, that I wanted to see what it was like so that maybe we could reach the conversation of going to 97. This is not about pushing a community down. I mean, Dana, you and I have had conversations about working in South Phoenix and helping communities, and I come from a community that doesn't have anything. Like, there's parts of sidewalks in Sunny Slope that are not yet built, and I understand that. And so I do feel like I had to respond to that because it's not a fair portrayal of what's going on. This is a conversation about making sure that we are able to move forward with these projects with the executive committee and them understanding how difficult this is for all of us. This is not, and I hope that you don't walk out of here feeling that way. And I feel like I had to address it because that comment of thank you for pushing South Phoenix, absolutely not. When my family immigrated to this country, the first park I visited was Cesar Chavez Park before it was a jewel of South Phoenix.
No,
It's something that this is a very hard thing to do, and
I'm
to
just
have
trying
this
to
conversation. I'm sorry, Madam
find-
Chair. I just,
Okay.
it's a very hard conversation to have. It's a very emotional conversation to have, and I agree with you. South Phoenix for a long time continues to be disinvested in, right? But I think this committee can push not just people to vote for it, but our council members to also act on it, because it's not just on us to have that conversation, it's on them. Why are they only giving us this much money when they know the need of the communities?
Well, that's for another discussion, because, we can't change it right now.
Thank you.
But we can. We've given up a lot to kind of accommodate the equity, which I think is very important for getting a citywide vote. Also very important because there's people all over the city who need parks, and we're probably one of the most popular bonds that there is. Everybody doesn't want to fall in a pothole, but streets isn't the most popular, or other ones that people just don't know how important they are. But parks, everybody sees what we do. So if we adopt 1 to 14 and ask that we not have the executive committee cut it any lower, because we already cut out 21 million ourselves, that we would ask that they accept that in the guise of equity and leaving an aquatic program that is balanced and a Marihance Park improvements that's balanced also. How does that sound? Dana, you okay? Gary? Adrian? Yes. You okay?
I think it's the best we can do in a difficult situation. Obviously, we want everybody to be resourced at the levels they need. One thing I will note, I think we do still have to make the adjustment to Pueblo Grande, the reduction based on reallocating that to Sweetwater.
We can make that adjustment if that's the direction.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And Madam Chair, to clarify the
Yes.
conversation, there'd been some conversation about advancing items 1 through, I believe it was 14,
Yes.
to the executive committee. If that were the case, Pueblo Grande wouldn't be in the subcommittee's recommendations at all, or the subcommittee could advance the entire package to the executive committee.
What we could do, could we highlight 1 to 14 and say this is where we feel that we would want funded. We would want the other 3 funded too, but with cuts, we prioritize these. Okay.
And Madam Chair, I think that's exactly right. We could say in our narrative, here's our rank list and the projects and the amount of money, and noting those things that you have mentioned.
Okay, and then the 6.8 would be reduced to 5.8.
That's
Correct.
5.3, I think.
Oh, 5.3, okay. Oh, there it is, okay. All right, can I get a motion to that effect? Ready? The motion would basically say we'd go 1 to 14 in the order that we see before us, and we would include 15, 16, 17 as additions if the executive committee wants to include them in, but we do not want them to replace 1 to 14. And we also ask that they give us the funding at 97 because we've already reduced down 21. Take that motion?
Yep, I'll go ahead and make the motion to go forward with 1 through 14.
1 through 14 with kind of highlighted and the other 3 included, but we do not want them funded before the 1 to 14. Okay.
Okay. So I'm making that motion to put forth to the executive committee to definitely look at 1 through 14 and the other 3
Yes.
not go
Above them. If they choose to fund those, do not substitute.
Yeah, what she said.
I'll just remind you, this is a recommendation.
As a recommendation. All right. And do I get a second?
Second.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second. And
We're going to do a voice vote on this one, and so there, Chris
we'll
will read the names.
We'll
And
put a roll call. Mhm.
Committee Member Burns? This is a roll call vote for your yes or no.
You got to vote.
Aye.
Committee Member Garcia? That was an aye.
Aye.
Committee Member Hunt?
Aye.
Committee Member Casa?
Aye.
Vice Chair Perez-Pawlowski?
Can I make a few remarks, Madam Chair? Can I just say this is, first, thank you to the staff for all the work, because we came to you for 3 meetings and kept asking you for things, and you delivered every single time. Thank you so much. Thank you to my colleagues. This is definitely an experience to know that we're going to be able to drive by these parks, or when the first fund gets, hopefully that gets fully funded, and when the first capital fund grant gets done, it's like, wow, we were a part of that. It's really cool. My family immigrated to Phoenix in 1995. And the first park we went to was Cesar Chavez Park. And one day I'll have kids, and that's the first park we'll go to, even though I live in District 3. But this is a really hard decision, and I cannot imagine what it's going to be like for our council members to have to vote on this. So thank you to the committee. Thank you to everyone. And I will repeat what I said. Like, this is not enough funding for any of these projects. Our communities deserve more. Every single one of these bonds should be fully funded, and I'll vote yes.
Chair Wilcox.
Yes. And in explaining my vote, I really want to thank the committee for attending the meetings, for a unanimous vote, even though, we have some strong feelings. I think it bodes well for us to go forward to the exec with a unanimous vote. And I know we can't count Jeff, but I think he'd be supportive also. I wish we had, him on Zoom. But with that, again, and the Vice Chair said it very well, thank you, all of you, from the attorney to the Finance Department. Ingrid, thank you, and Cynthia, especially you. I know we had you running, and I just really appreciate it. And it was a very good process in that people that had contracts with the city, we could see the contract, we could see what they were already doing, and just explaining everything to us. I think we all learned a lot about city budget and also the prioritization. I am sorry we cannot fund some of the projects that you brought forward, and perhaps if the city council, gives more money to the bond, or in the second phase, we'll be able to do more. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for all of the work, from the interpreter to the clerks to everybody. And this was a fun project to do, and now I will try to represent at executive the best I can our views and get equity, get more money, and not cut anything above 14. So thank you.
Get us all the money.
All right, is there anything else for the good of the whole?
Madam Chair, just again, you've mentioned all the staff. There was a lot of staff that put this effort together, and so thank you to all of them. And I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you to Alan Stevenson, who stood in for me when I was on vacation a couple of times. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Meeting adjourned.
I totally understand.
It's just